Hi everybody, and welcome back to another video. I hope you're doing well. In this video, I plan to demystify back button focus. I get asked all the time if I use back button focus, and I do, and I'm going to show you why it's a big advantage for many photographers, especially wildlife photographers. I'll show you what it's used for, how it works, what challenges it helps overcome, and I'll show you some practical examples on how to put it to good use. If you stay till the end, I'll reward you with a big tip on how to set up 2 back buttons that transformed my action photography and will for you as well. So let's get started. First off, what is back button focus? Most cameras focus by half pressing the shutter button where it focuses, and when you completely press it all the way down, it starts taking photos. Back button focus is taking the focus ability away from the trigger button, from the shutter button, and assigning it to a back button instead. So all that the front shutter button will do is start the light meter and take photos. The focusing of the camera is controlled by the back button. When you press it down, it focuses. When you release the finger, it stops focusing. Most people think that using the back button for focus means initiating the focus at the time you want. Actually, more often than not, it's actually when you want to stop focusing, you take your finger off the button, because there are times where you don't want to be focusing while you're taking photos, and I'll be showing you some examples later. First, let's clarify focus modes on cameras. Most cameras have 2 types of focus modes, a one-shot mode and a continuous mode. In one shot, the camera freezes the focal plane at a certain spot, and as you keep taking photos, it keeps taking them at that one focal plane. Continuous focus means that the focus point moves back and forth, and this is very useful for wildlife photography because most of the time your targets are moving or they're ready to move. For wildlife photography, I recommend putting your camera on continuous focus that moves back and forth. That would be AI servo on Canon cameras. On Nikon and Sony, that would be AFC. And that will be the basis upon which all my discussions will be taking place. I'll be assuming that you're on AFC or autofocus continuous. Sometimes when you're taking photos, you don't want the focus to change. Most cameras have focus points in the center of the frame. There are times when you want to have the subject for composition purposes off into the edges of the frame. If you move your subject off to the edge and the focus points in the center are pointed on the background, your camera will try to refocus on the background and your subject will no longer be in focus. Using back button focus avoids this problem. You avoid this problem by pressing the back button to focus on your subject, then releasing your thumb, that is releasing the back button so the camera is no longer trying to focus, and recomposing your target to the edge of the frame, and then pressing the shutter button to take photos. In this case, your camera is no longer trying to refocus on the background, it is still focused on the same plane that your target was on. In this particular scenario, you can move your target all around the frame as much as you want and your camera is not trying to refocus. You can put your target up in this corner, that corner, this corner, this corner, and take all the photos that you want. Your camera is not trying to refocus. If your target is moving, you keep your thumb on the back button and it will continue to track your target because you're in autofocus continuous that will continue to track objects. While you're pressing your thumb down on the focus button and your camera is tracking the focus, you keep pressing the shutter button and you can keep taking photos. Another good time to use back button focus is when there are obstructions in front of your bird. In this scenario, if I try to focus on the bird, there's a chance that the autofocus will try to focus on the branch in front of the bird. Instead, I'll point the autofocus point to the edge of the bird where the branch is not in the way, like the tail or the head. Then I will take my finger off the focus button, that's the back button, and then recompose my shot and take the shot without any risk of the camera trying to refocus on the branch in front of the bird. Here's another scenario. I noticed these tree swallows going in and out of a nest box. Even if I were to try to pre-focus on the nest box, invariably I'd end up focusing on the background when I tried to photograph the bird. Instead, using back button focus, I pre-focused on the nest box, then repositioned the camera in front of the nest box to take photos. Every time the swallow arrived, I shot a burst of photos and was able to get photos like this. This last scenario is a great example of how back button focus was very helpful for me. I was photographing diving terns. I would focus on the terns as they dove, but once they went underwater, my camera would try to focus on the water 10 or 20 feet behind the tern. When it came back out of the water, it was much more difficult to reacquire focus. So using back button focus, I would focus on the turns as they dove, but once they hit the water, I would take my finger off the focus button and wait for the turn to come back up. I would even keep shooting in the middle of this, and my camera wouldn't try to refocus. When the turn came back up, I would re-hit the focus button to reacquire focus and keep shooting. Because I left the focus plane at the same point that the turn hit the water, when it came back out of the water, it was really easy to reacquire focus and keep taking my photos. So let's look at how you set this up. I have a Canon camera, and the procedure here is to unassign autofocus from the front button and reassign it to a back button. So let me show you how this is done. We press the Q button and select the icon for customizing dials and buttons. The first on the upper left is the shutter button. We take that off metering and AF start and changing it to metering start. That means we've taken the autofocus ability away from the shutter button. Then move down to the AF on button. And for this one, we change it to metering and AF start. What we've done here is change the AF on button to be responsible for the autofocus. Now I'm going to show you how to set this up on a modern mirrorless Canon camera like my R5 or my R6. Again, hit the Q button, select custom controls, customize buttons, and here, the first one, you need to take the shutter button and move it away from metering and AF start to metering start. Effectively, this takes the autofocus ability away from the shutter button. Then, moving down to AF on, you move the AF on button to be metering and AF start. And what that does is it moves the autofocus function to the AF on button right here. And there you go. You're ready to go with back button focus. And I promised you if you stayed to the end, I'll teach you a secret trick. And here it is. On some cameras, you can program 2 back buttons. The reason this is great is that you can set one button for slow action and one for fast action. That way, if you ever get caught off guard with some quick action, all you need to do is jump to a second button. I'll be setting this up on my Canon camera. I'll show you how to do it on an older Canon camera and a more modern one. And I'll also show you on the screen camera models from other makers that I can confirm can be set up with a second back button. So on an older Canon camera like a DSLR, I have my 7D Mark II here. I'll show you how to do this. We're going to choose the icon for custom controls. We're going to go down to the star button, and we're going to move this around until we select register recall shooting function. And by pressing the info button, we can change the settings here. I can change the shutter speed to about 2,000th of a second. The aperture I'll set at the aperture of the lens that I'm using, and I'll set the ISO to auto ISO. Remember, this is your emergency button. You won't have time to think or change your settings. You need some kind of automatic setting like shutter priority, aperture priority. My personal favorite is manual with auto ISO. Now I'm going to show you how I've got my camera set up on my Canon R5 and my Canon R6. I've got them set up a little bit differently. I've got one back button, the AF on button, set to my regular modes such as single point or zone autofocus. And then my second button, the star button, I've got set to eye tracking. This is because in sun scenarios, eye tracking is the best autofocus method for me. At sun times, having the single autofocus point. I've got both to choose from at this point. Now to take a Canon R5 or R6 and assign a second button like the star button, again, you press the Q button, select custom controls, customize buttons. Here go down to the star button. So you got a few different choices here. One thing you can do is put it on metering and autofocus start, then hit the info button, and you can change the AF method to any of these focus points, but I like to use face tracking. So that way, I basically have face tracking assigned to my star button and traditional zones and focus points assigned to my AF on button. Another way of doing this would be to go down, hit register recall shooting functions, similar to my 7D Mark II or 5D Mark IV, hit the info button, and here you could set traditional settings like 1/2000th of a second, the aperture of your lens that you want. I personally prefer auto ISO for these emergency situations. Now you've got your star button set to a much more responsive arrangement. And the way you use this setup is that when you're taking photos of static birds, you use the AF on button. The minute something happens, like the bird jumping quickly, moving around, a bird flies by that you weren't ready, you just jump to that star button. It's ready to go, ready to take some action shots. Now we've got you set up, now it's time to go practice. It's true that this will not be intuitive, and the first few times you try it, it will be a little bit challenging. I really encourage you to stick it out, try it for a few days, see if you can get some results. Thanks so much for joining me. That's the end of the video. Let me know in the comments below if you were able to get this to work. And by the way, if you like this type of content, please give me a like, and if you want to see more of it in the future, please subscribe. Thanks very much, and I'll see you guys the next time.